friends. So this is just a quick update. I saw on Twitter today Ben Norton, the journalist from the Grey Zone, he posted this update and it said, huge. The ex-US ambassador to China admitted Chinese President Xi Jinping didn't want to militarize the South China Sea and offered a peace agreement, but the Obama administration rejected his olive branch and continued militarizing the region. USA is the aggressor.
On the South China Sea, you know, one of the stories I tell in the book and also in my Harper's article, I had lunch with Stapleton Roy, one of the former US ambassadors, actually to Singapore and to China, one of the best informed persons in China. He was born in China, brought up in China, speaks Mandarin, now working for Kissinger in some ways. So he says that there was a meeting between Obama and Xi Jinping, must have been 2015 or so, and at that meeting, Xi Jinping actually offered to Obama, saying, you know, okay, on South China Sea, it's a concern of yours. China is prepared to abide by the code of conduct. China is prepared to conclude these negotiations with ASEAN countries. And also, he said, and this is what he said, we have no intention of militarizing the islands that we have reclaimed, right? And Stapleton Roy said to me that if American diplomacy had been good, the American diplomat should have seized Xi Jinping's offer and said, okay, we accept your offer, no more militarization of South China Sea, which means the United States will, of course, restrain itself also on there. And Stapleton Roy said to me that instead of accepting Xi Jinping's offer, effectively the United States rebuffed Xi's offer by stepping up naval patrols near the reclaimed islands. And the Chinese said, okay, you rebuff my offer, I militarize them. So, you know, you have one narrative, which is the American Anglo-Saxon narrative. And then you have the other narrative. So what you will find in dealing with the United States and China, that it's never black and white. It's always shades of gray.
Yet more evidence where there is so much that the USA often is the instigator of these various hotspots all over the globe. And you've probably seen recently how the US has been basically trying to steal Citgo, which is Venezuela's oil company, right from underneath it. And it's trying to also to stop Iran from sending oil to Venezuela, because Venezuela doesn't have the ability to refine its own oil at the present time due to sanctions and all of that. So there's been brutal economic sanctions on Venezuela for a number of years now, and there's been about 40,000 Venezuelans have died since 2017 due to these crippling economic sanctions. Anyway, so this is just another example of what's happening with China and the amazing amount of the anti-Chinese propaganda online is just astonishing. I don't know what it was like when, you know, before Iraq was invaded, how much, like I know the US mainstream media were full on into pushing the weapons of mass destruction lie. Like, this is so widespread now, this anti-Chinese propaganda, and lying about China and vilifying China and the Chinese government, this whole yellow peril, in quotes, thing that is an underlying racist problem all over the world, really, for many, many decades, a long, long time now. And it doesn't take much to kind of bring it up to the surface. In fact, just recently, I was talking to somebody we have dealings with here, and I thought that he seemed to be up on a lot of things about what the US is up to, but he was totally taken in by the anti-Chinese propaganda, and also then his own racist issues were also thrown into the mix. His own sort of xenophobia, etc., was thrown into the mix, and I find it so depressing. You know, I'm not surprised that this happens because, particularly in Australia, where that sort of xenophobia about the Chinese taking over and all that kind of thing, completely ignoring the US, by the way, who is trying to take over everything, the US government, and has been for a long, long time now. including interfering with our political situation here in Australia and they admitted to helping overthrow our Prime Minister in 1975, Gough Whitlam, a Labor Prime Minister. I mean, we have ample evidence of that if you're actually looking at real journalism and all of that, which nobody, which is suffocated by algorithms now, and also just, by the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, etc., Twitter. I'm sure that a lot of politicians probably know that, but no one will speak out against the US. We're just lackeys here. And today I even saw Adam Bandt, who never really, he's the leader of the Australian Green Party. He never really talks about US imperialism, what a surprise, and doesn't really mention anything about Julian Assange, what a surprise. And today he said something about human rights abuses in China. It just makes me shake my head, because he just plays into the whole xenophobia, the whole yellow peril, the whole as if China is the epicenter of human rights abuses. I don't know, it's so depressing. It's so depressing because the major parties now, and I wouldn't call the Australian Greens a major party, but they're an alternative to the Australian Labor Party, which is an imperialist party, and the Coalition, which is an imperialist party, the US imperialist lackey, both of them. They never talk about it. And then the only time that Adam Bandt mentions anything really is this, something against China. And that's just to keep in favor, so that he doesn't look like he's an outlier, so that he doesn't look like he's pushing against US interests and all of that. So it's just so sad. And of course we don't have any fourth estate to speak of here in Australia. So there's barely anything pushing against that anti-Chinese narrative, and that eventually is going to lead to a hot war in China. It's already starting to be a cold war, and it will eventually lead to a hot war, because they're pushing for all their worth in the United States against China, and pushing this narrative that they're the most evil nation on the planet at this point. I mean, we've shifted from Russia now to China, and not that Russia is out of the picture, but China now is the big focus, the whole pivot to Asia thing that Obama was talking about a few years ago. They are the focus of the US imperialist national security state to try and destroy by whatever means necessary. And this is starting off with manufacturing consent from the public through the stenographers in the fourth estate. They're just copying down whatever the national security state tells them to, and they just pump out that propaganda. They're just an arm of the national security state. So this is what's being done right now, manufacturing consent all over the world to eventually either invade China or try and destroy it in any way they can. So we have to be aware of these things, and I'm sure if you watch this channel, you've already got an awareness of how this goes. But I don't recall, as I said, seeing, although I wasn't hooked into social media as much in 2003, I did march against the war, the war that was being proposed on Iraq in 2003, but there wasn't much in the way of social media, and so I didn't know the extent to which they were pumping up that lie about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So I don't know if it's as bad as what this is with the anti-Chinese stuff. But it's pretty bad, and it's very bad here in Australia, very bad. And you've even got stupid politicians like Adam Bandt just trotting along like an obedient little US lackey, going along with it, basically. Not calling out the US for any of its enormous human rights abuses all over the world, and in its own country, too. Anyway, so thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Viga. Till next time. Bye for now.